Hello guys, now we start with the Python functions topics. So in order to define a function in Python, you have to use the def keyword like this, and then at the end you have to place the double dots. For example, let's copy this in our environment. Okay, now I want to execute what is inside my function. So inside my function there is simply a print statement. Okay, be careful that for calling the function you have to call it after you have defined it. So for example, you have to call it here. These empty arguments in the round brackets means that the function does not need any input, but simply to be called, to be executed, it must be only called. So let's try. Okay, you see that the function is executed. So let's try to define it like this and to call the function like this. So you see that my function is not defined. So here there is an error that says you that you have before to define the function and then to call it. Okay, so now it works. So in this case, I didn't give any inputs to my functions, but for sure, when I use a function, I must give some inputs, otherwise it does not make any sense. So let's try, for example, in this way. Try to copy this code. And you see that in this case is very convenient to have a function, because otherwise you have to print this statement 3 times. And in the code, Python code, also in the other languages code, it's not suggested to make the code repeated many times. So it's suggested to define a function or a method that we will see in the next lessons and then call it each time. Okay. Here you see that I print maybe a family member names. You see, because all of them have the same surname. So, for example, instead of use the function, try to make it by heart. Okay, maybe Emil. Tobias. And Linus. Okay. I comment out this. And you see that the outcome is the same. But if, for example, I want to change the surname because, for example, I want to print another family surname, in this case, I have to change for each statement, I have to change by hand the surname. So imagine to have 100 members in a family or 100 members in an association. You have to change the surname in each print statement. So now they are 3, okay, but if they are, for example, 1000, it's very difficult to go through each of this statement. So this is the convenience to use the function. Let's see here. we cancel. See that if I want to change my surname, for example, this surname, you see that now it's automatically changed in each of the member. Okay. Then in this case, I only have one argument. But for example, I want to get also to acquire also the birthplace. So I will print like this. Remember that each time you have to add a space, otherwise the printing is not nice. So now I want to print birthplace and I want to add the birthplace. You see, it's automatically suggested by Visual Studio. So now, if I provide only one argument, you see that my function missing one required positional argument. So I have to provide it. To provide it, for example, I write India, Pakistan, there is an error, okay, and USA. So now you see that also the birthplace is updated. Okay, if I don't know how many arguments I have to give to the function, I can place an asterisk in front of my input. So for example, I copy this to make quicker. And you see that I don't know how many inputs or parameters we have to give, but I, for example, give on all these three parameters. These three parameters are packed inside a list, and I take the third element of the list simply. Okay, maybe I print the list to make you more clear this concept. Remember to make correctly the concatenation. Okay, here there is an error. It says me that I cannot concatenate a string to a tuple. So this is a tuple. Okay, now I see that the tuple is like this. So I gave 3 inputs, they are packed into a tuple, and I take the third element of the tuple to print the youngest child. It can be also the second one, as you want. Okay, now you see that it's Tobias. Okay. If instead you don't know the keyword arguments, you have to add double asterisk before the parameter name. So I show you. Let's print kid. So this time I pass 2 parameters, fname, first name, and last name. And let's see how they are mapped. As you see, they are mapped like a dictionary. So in order to access the last name of this dictionary, so in order to access the value of this key, you have to type like this, as we have seen in the previous lessons. Instead, if I want to print the first name, I take the fname key value, and you see that it's Tobias. Okay, maybe I can also add the birthplace equal to India, for example. And I access the value from the key birthplace. Okay, so in our project we will define the arguments in an explicit way in order to make our code more clear, but this is for sure a nice way to define the inputs that I have to give to my function. Okay. As you see, I can also give to my function a list. Okay, then what I want to show you is the return value. Okay, for example, I define this function and I call it, but this function return me a value which is 5 times the value that I pass. So for example, let's call it, for example, I give 2, and you see that nothing is printed out. So I memorize the return value in a variable and I print this variable, because I know that my function give me a value and I want to print it out. So now you see 10. Okay. So I think that for the functions is enough. and see you next time.